And now, after watching the Republicans shut down the government to get dingleberries into law, the Democrats are prepared to shut down the government to get dingleberries into law. Although this one is even more stupid because this strategy has never even worked for Republicans. As you heard from Jim McGovern in 2018, Democrats have long argued that shutdowns are unfair to workers and that the government shouldn't be used as leverage to get partisan policies into law, and that shutdowns as leverage don't work. And yet, here they are, using government as leverage to get partisan policies into law, regardless of workers, and the total failure of the strategy ever working in the past. The hypocrisy of the Democrats is just overwhelming.
I am so damn tired of being lied to. I don't think I can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies, but I'm not gonna buy it anymore.
Hello, my friend, and thank you for listening to the 323rd episode of Congressional Dish. I'm your host, Jennifer Briney. And today's episode is a warning, because as I record this on Tuesday, September 23rd, our Congress is not working, and we are on the verge of a government shutdown. And I feel like I'm losing my mind, because a shutdown at this particular moment in time is extraordinarily dangerous. And right now, the Democrats in Congress have the power to stop it. In the 119th Congress, which is fully controlled by the Republicans, Democrats have had very little power to do anything. But keeping the government open, this they can do. And yet, there is a very real chance that they are going to instead use their power to shut the government down and hope that we will all blame Republicans. And to be fair, Republicans have taken the blame for every other shutdown that's occurred in the last quarter century. But the reason for that was because in those shutdowns, the Republicans tried to hold the government hostage in order to get some of their partisan goals signed into law attached to the must-sign government funding. But this time, it's the Democrats who are doing that. And in pursuit of partisan dingleberries, they are putting our government in grave danger. And so today, I'm going to tell you why I say that. Specifically, today, you are going to learn the stories of the last few shutdowns and why Democrats think that history will repeat itself in their favor, and why I think they are very wrong. And I will also prepare you for what the consequences of a shutdown will be, and why this shutdown could possibly be far more dangerous than any we have experienced in the past. And I want to do this right now because we still have time to stop this. The shutdown begins at midnight on September 30th, which should be 6 days after I release this episode. And maybe some people who will hear this will call their Democrats and tell them to walk us away from this precipice, because like I said, they have the power to do so. But even if I can't stop the shutdown, at least I can make my case in public. Or at the very least, have this on record so that I can say, I told you so. But either way, I'm going to say my piece. And so first, let's do a quick review of why we are on the verge of a federal government shutdown. So government shutdowns occur when Congress fails to do its most basic job and fund the government for the following year on time. And the deadline is always the same every year. It's always September 30th. And yet Congress has failed to fully meet that deadline every year since 1996. And usually when this happens, with a handful of shutdown exceptions, when their deadline is missed, Congress passes and the president signs what is known as a continuing resolution, as in a resolution that continues government funding at current levels until Congress can finish its homework. We have been operating under a continuing resolution the whole year since the Biden administration. And so another continuing resolution would continue many Democratic Party negotiated spending levels. FYI. But right now, there is drama because while the House Republicans, in a very uncharacteristic move for this bunch, the House Republicans have passed a continuing resolution that would fund the government until mid-November. But Senate Democrats are refusing to let it pass the Senate unless they can get some policy and funding changes attached, changes that President Trump would not be willing to sign into law outside of an emergency situation. Basically, the Democrats are trying to use the threat of a government shutdown as leverage to attach dingleberries to the funding law. And we've seen this strategy before. Republicans in the recent past have tried to get dingleberries attached to continuing resolutions. And to remind myself of how that worked out for them at the time, I turned to the only person that I really trust right now to tell me what happened in the past. And that person is me. Because I've been producing this podcast long enough that I was recording podcasts during the last two extended government shutdowns, in October of 2013 and during the longest shutdown in U.S. history, which happened last time we had a President Trump. And so this first clip, we're going to go back in time now to episode number 46 of Congressional Dish. It's called Shutdown Assured. And this is what I said in that episode a few days before the 2013 shutdown. And so what we have going on right now is that Congress needs to give themselves an extension, some extra time to finish their homework because they suck and didn't do their job right. So what should be happening right now is that a bill that just extends the 2013 funding levels should pass the House and then the Senate and then go to the president to be signed. Easy peasy taco squeezy. But that's not what's happening because the Republican Party sees this as an excellent opportunity to get things signed into law that couldn't be signed into law otherwise by attaching it to this must-sign bill. Because you see, the Republican Party has voted since they took control of the House. They have voted over and 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 over again to sabotage Obamacare in a bunch of different ways. But none of those bills have been signed into law because we elected Democrats to run the Senate and Barack Obamacare to be the president. So he's not signing this stuff into law. So the only way they're going to get to sabotage the Affordable Care Act is if they do it through attaching something to must-sign legislation. And in the following episode, the 47th episode of Congressional Dish, here's who I blamed after the government shut down. But in this particular instance, when it comes to the government shutdown, this is the House Republicans' fault. It is the fault of one party in one branch of government, the Republicans in the House. And in the end, after 16 days, the Senate's clean version without the Obamacare damaging dingleberries was signed into law because the American people blamed the House Republicans, just like I did. In other words, the people attempting to attach a dingleberry got nothing except blame. So now let's fast forward to 2018. We are now in the first Trump administration. And in Congressional Dish number 188, I called it Welcome to the 116th Congress because it was the beginning of the Congress. Well, that episode was recorded in January 2019 in the middle of the longest government shutdown in U.S. history. And here's the situation on the day that I recorded. 7 out of the 12 segments of government are currently shut down and have been shut down for 3 weeks now. As of this recording, I'm recording this on January 11th, this now ties for the longest shutdown in U.S. history. And the House and Senate have both gone home for the weekend, so we are definitely going to set records here in the worst way in the beginning of the 116th Congress. And so further on in that episode, I told the story of how that shutdown started. And part of that story was that right before the shutdown, there was an emergency meeting in the House Rules Committee, as one might expect there would be. Except that emergency meeting wasn't about the looming government funding crisis. It was an emergency meeting designed to set up a vote on a bill about cheese. So that was weird. But that's actually not the point of the clip that I'm about to play for you. What I want you to hear is the conversation that took place in that cheesy emergency meeting between Republican with the Texas accent, Pete Sessions, and Democrat Jim McGovern. They are both still in the House of Representatives, and I just want you to pay special attention to the arguments being made by Jim McGovern, the Democrat of Massachusetts.
In my opinion, not one FBI agent, special agent will be furloughed. Not one Secret Service special agent will be furloughed. They are considered essential employees to the United States.
Yeah, they won't be paid, Mr. Chairman. That's the issue.
The opportunity for us to make sure that, as you know, we've never not paid these employees, and I'm sure that This will.
Well, it's not a very nice Christmas gift to give to people who put their lives on the line to protect our
you
country.
say they're not being paid. That's one thing. To say they're not going to go to work.
Well, I didn't. I mean, I basically said that they were going to be forced to go without pay.
You indicated they would not be available.
Well, they will go without pay. So I mean, I know one of your members said that that's the price you pay for public service. But I'm sorry, these people put their lives on the line for us, and they are protecting our border, notwithstanding what the chairman said. And yet we are saying thank you by potentially not paying them, and I find that objectionable.
You can object all you want. I voted to make it happen.
Yeah.
The Democrats in 2018 found it objectionable to make government workers come to work without pay. They objected to the Republicans trying to use government funding as a dingleberry vehicle. Because here's the rest of our flashback to 2019. Here's a reminder of why that shutdown became the longest shutdown in U.S. history.
What's so different about this shutdown in comparison to the others is that this isn't a product of congressional dysfunction. The Congress agreed to a solution. The House and the Senate passed an identical bill funding the government until February 8th. This was done. This is Trump. He's digging in his heels on this $5 billion for a border wall or fence or whatever. And I don't know how this one ends because Donald Trump is such a weird dude, and he's such a my way or the highway kind of guy.
And in the end of that shutdown, with the entire country rightfully blaming him for trying to attach a dingleberry to government funding and causing the shutdown to continue, Donald Trump caved. He got no money for the border wall, at least not then. I mean, God knows that he got that and more in the one big beautiful bill. But the point is that it was another Republican/Trump attempt to get partisan dingleberries into funding, and once again, it failed. The American people have been consistent. We always blame the party attaching the dingleberries. And this time, the party with the dingleberry demands is the Democratic Party. And so here's what's going on as of this recording on Tuesday, September 23rd. The House of Representatives, controlled by Republicans, has passed a continuing resolution that extends the Biden-era funding levels and priorities again until November 21st. It's kind of the best-case scenario bill for the Democrats. And the Republicans are calling their continuing resolution clean, and you know what? So am I. I read it. It extends the funding levels, and the stuff that it adds is completely uncontroversial. So like the additions are that it would add $30 million to reimburse local law enforcement for lawmaker security. Fine. It adds an additional $28 million for Supreme Court security. Fine. It adds $30 million for executive branch protection. Fine. I'm happy to fund all of those things after Charlie Kirk's assassination, and so are the Democrats. But most importantly, House Republicans, in their continuing resolution, they put in no major cuts. In fact, it's full of funding extensions. And what it does change are total nothing burgers. There's like some tweaks to drug authorization fees and procedures. There is nothing in that bill that endangers any of us. And anyone calling this continuing resolution a partisan bill is simply full of shit. Hakeem Jeffries.
House Democrats have been clear that we will not support a partisan Republican spending bill that continues to gut the health care of the American people.
There are absolutely no partisan dingleberries in the House continuing resolution worth shutting down the government to stop. And so the bill itself, the House Republicans continuing resolution, I support it. As much as I can support the result of the House failing to do its job again. But this is an acceptable Band-Aid, and I would vote for it with no hesitation. But almost every Democrat in the House of Representatives refused to vote for this extension of basic government functions. Only Democrat Jared Golden of Maine voted to keep the government functional along with all but 2 Republicans, which is stunning, because there are at least 20 Republicans who have vowed to never vote for a CR ever again. Now, they cave every time, but they didn't even cause drama this time. They just voted for it. It feels like a miracle. It is seriously the best case scenario we could ask for, that the House voted for this level of sanity at this moment in time. But because of the Democrats, it only squeaked through the House of Representatives. It passed 217 to 212. And the Republicans, going back to being bad faith, awful stewards of our government, well, after that, they decided to just go home on an extended Rosh Hashanah vacation until September 29th, the day before their deadline. Or at least that's their official return date, according to the congressional record. Verbally, House Republican leaders have said that the Republican House members are not coming back to D.C. before the funding deadline. And so what they're doing is they are essentially daring the Senate to either take their bill or leave it. And so instead of using this full week that the rest of us are working to finish their homework, they instead f***ed off to play a lazy game of legislative chicken. And so all eyes are going to be on the Senate. And it's not looking good because the Senate already voted down the totally reasonable House continuing resolution. In a vote of 44 to 48, with Democrat John Fetterman of Pennsylvania, the only Democrat to vote yes, and Republican Rand Paul of Kentucky joining the rest of the Democrats in voting no, the House's extension of Biden-era funding has already failed once. Now, it can get another vote, so it's not officially dead, but the near unanimous no votes from Democrats is not a good sign. The Republicans, who control the Senate, then allowed the Democrats' preferred bill to come up for a vote. Their bill only funds the government through the end of October, so the Democrats would bring along our next crisis faster. But the Democrats' bill is also stuffed with dingleberries. So specifically, the Democrats want to make permanent the Affordable Care Act subsidies that were not a part of the original law, but were instead put in place under the COVID-19 emergency. They also want to restore some funding that's been frozen by the Trump administration. They want to reverse cuts to Medicaid enacted under the shameful One Big Beautiful Bill. And they also want to increase security for lawmakers. And politically, I support all of those things. But using the basic functions of government as leverage to get your political goals accomplished via dingleberry, it wasn't okay when the Republicans did it in the past, and it's not okay when the Democrats do it now. And they're not even swinging for the fences in their attempt. The restoration of Medicaid funding would be great, and I wouldn't mind having more government money to help me pay for health care when I have to buy it on the exchanges. But we have concentration camps being constructed in this country. We have people being snatched up at airports and off the street, including tourists, legal residents, U.S. citizens, and they are being snatched up by unidentified masked thugs with no warrants. There is crazy shit going on in this country. So, you want to stop the Trump warrantless kidnappings via dingleberry? Okay, let's dance. But to shut down the government over restoring extra Obamacare subsidies from when we're in the middle of the COVID emergency? I don't even know if I support that because we're not in that emergency anymore. And I don't even think the Senate Democrats care that much about that anyway. I don't think this is a real attempt. I think they just want to look like they're taking a stand because what they are really bitching about is more about them. Here's the head of the Democrats in the Senate, Chuck Schumer of New York. Here he is talking to reporters in the Senate hallway on September 19th.
Donald Trump continues to push for a shutdown by not negotiating with us. But we are confident when the American people contrast these two proposals, they're going to side with us. They're going to tell Republican congressmen and senators that they should start talking to the Democrats because we are talking about what people need.
If they think that they look like fighters by whining that the Republican meanies won't talk to us, they are so wrong. This is the weakest weenie move I think I've ever seen. And I've been watching the Democrats be weenies for a very long time. It's like they keep trying to copy Republicans' bad behavior. Like the Republicans gerrymander their districts, and so the Democrats are going to gerrymander, just in fewer states and less effectively. The Republicans take corporate money, so Democrats are going to take corporate money. But they also have to legislate to help the working class, and so they can't really go full-blown and be the corporate party as effectively, and so they lose by pleasing no one. And now, after watching the Republicans shut down the government to get dingleberries into law, the Democrats are prepared to shut down the government to get dingleberries into law. Although this one is even more stupid because this strategy has never even worked for Republicans. As you heard from Jim McGovern in 2018, Democrats have long argued that shutdowns are unfair to workers and that the government shouldn't be used as leverage to get partisan policies into law and that shutdowns as leverage don't work. And yet, here they are, using government as leverage to get partisan policies into law, regardless of workers, and the total failure of the strategy ever working in the past. The hypocrisy of the Democrats is just overwhelming. But more than hypocrisy, the Democrats in their game of attach the dingleberry are putting our government in danger at a time when we need them to protect it. And the reason this is a more dangerous time for a shutdown is because, according to the Congressional Research Service, there is not much legal guidance instructing what must happen during a government shutdown. What few guardrails exist come mainly from the Anti-Deficiency Act, but those are clear as mud. The rules that we have been operating under were largely created using an interpretation of the Anti-Deficiency Act by the Attorney General after a brief government shutdown in 1980, which means we have been operating during shutdowns not based on laws, but on a 45-year-old precedent. And the precedent in shutdowns is clear. It is always regular Americans who truly pay for them. So let's start with federal employees and contractors. Even the ones who have to come to work because they are considered essential, they don't get paid during a shutdown because the Constitution doesn't allow money to be dispersed from the Treasury if the appropriations laws have not been signed. In the shutdowns of the Congressional Dish era, this has meant that approximately 800,000 public servants have had their paychecks stopped due to congressional incompetence. During the last shutdown, the Trump shutdown, the longest one in U.S. history, those 800,000 people didn't get their paychecks for 35 days. And what would your finances look like if your paychecks just stopped arriving for 35 days? Now, due to that unfairness and the shameful admission by that Congress that they were likely to keep failing to do their most basic job in the future, in 2019, Congress passed and President Trump signed the Government Employee Fair Treatment Act, which requires the federal employees to be back paid as soon as possible after a shutdown ends. Now, this is good for federal employees because at least now they will know that they will be paid eventually, even for work that they didn't have to do. So for federal employees with some savings, a shutdown could even feel like a nice little unnecessary taxpayer-funded vacation. But this may also have the effect of reducing the urgency to reopen the government quickly. Now, we haven't had a long shutdown since the last time Donald Trump was president, but if the Democrats listen to the hysterical, do something, do anything crowd, we may find out very soon if the guaranteed repayment of federal workers makes the government harder to reopen. But there are private sector workers that work for the government too, and they were not protected by that 2019 law. While federal government employees are guaranteed to be back paid, government contractors are not. This means that companies have to find a way to pay their employees even though their funding has stopped for no good reason and for an unknown amount of time. When those companies lose their funding, they often furlough their employees, which reduces the amount of money in those people's paychecks. And a furlough can also cause people to fail to hit the required number of work hours that make them eligible for their health insurance, meaning even more private sector employees are likely to lose health insurance in the case of a long shutdown. So this is going to have a ripple effect for lots of regular people like you and I all over the country, for people who work for the government and who work for the private sector too. Because even if you're not employed in any way by the federal government, this will affect you too in ways seen and unseen. In past shutdowns, like research at the National Institutes of Health ground to a halt, which would have to do so again, even the studies that haven't been killed by RFK Jr. Also, the Centers for Disease Control, they had to stop doing disease surveillance. And of course, our national parks had to close, costing our communities millions of dollars in tourism and ruining vacations. Speaking of ruined vacations, passports and visas stopped getting processed. And then, in the support our troops categories, veteran services ranging from health to welfare to finance services, they all have to stop. And then for the rest of us taxpayers, this costs billions of dollars to stop and restart the government agencies. That's just wasting your money. And on top of that, shutdowns have always caused recruitment and retention problems in the federal workforce. But that is a Trump administration goal. In fact, a shutdown plays into Trump's hands in a lot of really dangerous ways. That's why this is more dangerous than usual, because like I said, there really isn't a detailed law governing what the president can and can't do during a shutdown. And we've been governed by precedent. And precedent is something that Donald Trump respects not at all. But let's just pretend for a moment that Donald Trump hasn't already proven to give zero fucks about precedent. Let's pretend that he might be interested in following the rules. What are those rules? Well, in essence, during shutdowns, federal government agencies have only been allowed to spend money to either shut down operations or carry out functions which were funded and authorized by previous laws, and only functions which either have no end date or extend beyond the current fiscal year. This is complicated, though, because if carrying out those functions is dependent on functions that haven't been funded, then even that might not be possible. But there are some exceptions. The exceptions allow federal government actions to continue if they are deemed essential, or if the functions are part of the constitutional duties of the president, because the president's authority is not granted through the appropriations, which are controlled by Congress. The president's authority is granted directly by the Constitution. So that means that Congress can't shut Trump down. No matter what, President Trump is going to continue to work, continue to get paid, along with everyone who works for him. And while he and his loyalists remain fully funded at work, the work they get to do is decide what is and what is not essential in the rest of the agencies. And so instead of Congress deciding what gets funded and what parts of our government will remain and what will get cut, as long as the government is shut down, many of those decisions get transferred to Trump. And even the Attorney General from 45 years ago, whose interpretations we have been relying on for all these years, even he said there's really no precise list of what the president can and cannot do during a shutdown. And so when we are talking about President Donald Trump, who is doing things that the Constitution straight up does not allow him to do, what do you think he's going to do with legal ambiguity? My guess is that he'll do whatever the fuck he wants. Or more precisely, whatever the fuck Russell Vought wants. Russell Vought is the current director of the Office of Management and Budget, an executive branch agency, and he specifically is the guy who would be empowered to give instructions to executive branch agencies on how to prepare for and operate during a shutdown. And if you value a functional government, that is bad. Now, I still think that the Democrats' focus during the last election on the Project 2025 boogeyman, I still think that focus was a bit demented. Because in reality, Project 2025 was a Heritage Foundation document, had nothing to do with the Trump campaign except that they had some overlapping goals. But that document is useful for understanding Russell Vought because he was one of the literal authors of it. And in the chapter that Russell Vought wrote, the chapter about the agency he is now in charge of, the Office of Management and Budget, he made it crystal clear that agency employees under his leadership are expected to be loyal and working on behalf of President Trump. Here are some quotes. Quote, "It is vital that the director and his political staff, not the careerists, drive these offices in pursuit of the president's actual priorities and not let them set their own agenda based on the wishes of the sprawling good government management community in and outside of government," unquote. He also wrote, quote, "Success in meeting that challenge will require a rare combination of boldness and self-denial. Boldness to bend or break the bureaucracy to the presidential will, and self-denial to use the bureaucratic machine to send power away from Washington," unquote. And it is clear that he's been trying to break the bureaucracy, aka break our government, ever since Trump empowered him. Because he is the person who heads the agency on top of the failed experiment that was DOGE. For those not in the know, the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, that was never a real government department. It was a sub-agency of the Office of Management and Budget that was renamed to both trick people into thinking that it had the power of a department and to tickle the fancy of the always childish Elon Musk, who at the time was in charge of it. But as you probably do know, DOGE tried in quite a few legal and blatantly illegal ways to encourage mass resignations and enact mass firings of government employees. And while Elon and his ridiculous personality and his chainsaw got all of the attention and the blame for the DOGE debacle, all of that was done under the leadership of Russell Vought. He was the person who was actually in charge of that government slash and burn project. So here's Russell Vought on Tucker Carlson's show shortly after the election talking about his plans for DOGE.
Well, there certainly is going to be mass layoffs and firings, particularly across some of the agencies that we don't even think should exist.
And right now, all of our agencies still exist. And so I don't think that he thinks his job is done. And while Elon has returned to whatever lair he sleeps in at Twitter or SpaceX or Tesla or who fucking cares, Russell Vought hasn't gone anywhere. He's still the director of the Office of Management and Budget. And he would get to decide how our federal agencies function or don't function, and which federal employees work during a shutdown. And this man has already shown an enthusiastic willingness to make working for the government so unstable a profession and so chaotic that federal employees will want to quit. Shutting down the government and their paychecks will only help his cause. Like, just listen to how this guy talks about funding for agencies. In this case, this was a speech that he was giving in 2023, but he was specifically talking about the EPA, but it's the strategy. That's what I want you to pay attention to, because it's the strategy that he is employing across the board.
We want their funding to be shut down so that the EPA can't do all of the rules against our energy industry because they have no bandwidth financially to do so. We want to put them in trauma.
And so Democrats shutting down the funding of these agencies because mean Republicans won't talk to us. That plays right into this dude's hands. And so anyone who cares about our government remaining functional should not want that to happen. And because he would be empowered, this could explain why President Trump is so clearly not that interested in stopping a shutdown from happening. After all, he's not the one making the demands this time. In fact, President Donald Trump thanked the House for passing its clean continuing resolution. But does this sound like a guy desperate to keep the government open to you? Here he is on September 19th in the Oval Office.
We'll continue to talk to the Democrats, but I think you could very well end up with a closed country for a period of time. And we'll take care of the military, we'll take care of Social Security, we'll take care of the things that we have to take care of. A lot of the things that Democrats fight for, which in many cases aren't very good things, will not be able to be paid.
He seems to know that he gets to pick and choose what stays open during a shutdown. He seems to know that a shutdown increases his power. And unfortunately, we are in an unprecedented situation right now. We have a party that is hell-bent on destroying whole segments of our federal government. Specifically, they are intent on destroying agencies that keep us safe from the consequences of corporate greed, because the Republicans have long been the servants of corporate wealth. Which means that we need an opposition party in this moment that is going to do everything they can to stop the bleeding. And when you are trying to preserve a government, the dumbest possible thing you can do is shut it down and hand more power over to the agents of destruction. And yet, in order to look like they're doing something, or to get the Republicans to talk to them, shutting down the government is precisely what the Democrats look poised to do. And they can blame Trump and the Republicans all they want. But the continuing resolutions text will speak for itself in the history books. It's the Democrats who are trying the Dingleberry method. And when I re-listen to this episode in a few years, it's the Democrats I will tell myself that I blamed. It doesn't matter if you support the Dingleberries that they are trying to attach to the funding. It's the strategy that matters. And it's a dumb strategy because it has never worked. And if they know it's not going to work, then it's just reckless political theater. Either way, Democrats are not going to win this one. But the real tragedy is that the congressional Democrats aren't going to lose it either. Who loses are going to be the people who work for our government, who have had an unnecessarily chaotic year already. Who loses will be all of us who pay taxes, because shutting down and reopening the government agencies is expensive and wastes our money when it's so easily avoided, like right now. And who loses beyond that is also unknown, because depending on the amount of power commanded by the Trump White House in the absence of any actual shutdown guardrails, who knows how much damage they'll be able to do. It's in all of our interest, except maybe Donald Trump's, to keep our government open, even if it's only running on fumes. And so if you agree, please contact your Democrats right now, because we are running out of time to save them from themselves. So I just want to thank our executive producers and all of our producers really for keeping Congressional Dish in existence. It's been a rough couple of weeks. Those of you who support the show already know that. That is because I have actually been quite active on our Green Room feed, which is what I've nicknamed our Patreon feed. But yeah, over on Patreon, I've been having a lot of existential thoughts about this podcast. And if you're curious about any of that, which has been all happening in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination, if you're curious about any of that, there's some episodes waiting for you on the Patreon private feed, along with the Last Week in Congress episodes. But yeah, I really need your support in these times, because if you weren't paying me, this job just feels dangerous in a way now that it hasn't in the past. And so I'm really doing this now for this community, and I'll keep doing this for a while. I hope. And one of the people who's really helped for so long to keep this podcast up and running is Mike Coverdale. He is an executive producer many times over, and he has another executive producer credit that he wants to put on an episode. So he said, I would like credit for Congressional Dish 176, Regime Change Venezuela. With Trump sending troops there to fabricate a war so he can exert executive authority, it is time for people to revisit how our government has been threatening Venezuela for decades in order to allow oil giants to steal their resources cheaply, unquote. Mike, thank you for bringing that up and for highlighting that episode and moving it up the most valuable episodes list. We should be paying a lot of attention to Venezuela, because Trump is also just blowing up Venezuelan boats full of people on them, calling them terrorists, but like, who fucking knows who these people are? One of the most frustrating things in my life right now is that I have this job, and there are so many things that Congress should be investigating, including Trump possibly starting a war or preparing for a war with Venezuela. Like, I don't know. I would love to have Marco Rubio's ass like hauled into a hearing and have all these questions asked by Congress. I'd also like to know, like, under what authority is Trump just murdering people at sea? So many questions and just no hearings about this whatsoever. So yeah, thank you for shining a light on that. And obviously, if I see anything come across the congressional record that indicates that there's an investigation, I will pay attention to it right away. But right now, the Republicans are complicit with what everything Trump is doing. They are not doing any oversight, at least not much. I will say that there was one hearing that I will listen to in the Senate that happened last week. So there's some indication that the tides are turning, but there was a hearing where Senate Republicans wanted to talk to the CDC director because she was recently fired after only being on the job for a month. And apparently, and again, I need to listen to it, but what I do know is that she testified that RFK Jr. was pushing her to approve things before she was even seeing them. And so that is real political influence in our scientific agencies, especially the CDC, which is supposed to keep us safe from diseases. So I want to watch that hearing. And that is the first sign that I've seen that the Republicans are investigating the Trump administration in any way. So I'm glad to see anything happening at all, but we need a whole lot more than we're getting. All right. So yeah, if you want to hear more on a regular basis, please support the show on Patreon. Listen to Last Week in Congress, but I will have a summary episode of this month coming out soon here on Congressional Dish. And then, like I said, I'm going to listen to that CDC director hearing. And if it is interesting, that might be a future episode of Congressional Dish. We will see. Either way, I want to thank the people that make this podcast possible for me to produce. So thank you to my production and research assistant, Claire. Thank you to Mike at Pro Podcast Solutions. Thank you to Mark at podcastbranding.co. He does our web design and security. Thank you to my sister, Lauren, who is our executive producer services specialist. Thank you to my biggest fan and tax dude, my dear old dad. And thank you, as always, to our guardian angel, Brian Karras. I still see him in every episode's artwork, even though it's now being created by ChatGPT. I like to think that Brian is my little robot who is making the art for us from above. All right, thanks so much. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
We're surrounded now by liars coming at us through our TV screens.
We don't have a domestic spying program.
They're content to fight in black and white despite of any in-betweens. We got a president who plays with the facts. What the facts? And then he waves a flag to cover his tracks. As if a lie is alright, if the end will justify the means. Now we are so damn tired of being lied to.
The polar ice caps aren't going away.
We don't think we can deny it anymore.
Government jobs consume the profits of the private sector.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. Now we're not keeping quiet.
These bills represent common sense, bipartisan solutions that actually solve problems.